Elliot Carter wasn't exactly living his best life. At 32, he was stuck in a tiny apartment on the wrong side of town, drowning in bills and barely scraping by as a handyman. His last job at a tech repair shop had ended abruptly when the company downsized, leaving him with nothing but a box of tools and a sinking feeling in his gut. Desperate for work, Elliot spent hours scrolling through online job boards late one night. That's when he saw it, an ad that seemed too good to be true. Caretaker needed for high-profile client. The headline read, "The pay was astronomical, enough to wipe out all his debts and then some. Housing included. No specific qualifications listed beyond resourcefulness and discretion." It sounded suspiciously vague, but Elliot didn't care. He needed this badly. After submitting an application with trembling fingers, he got a call within hours. A smooth-voiced woman from some agency named Interstellar Liaisons interviewed him briefly over video chat. She asked odd questions like, "Are you comfortable working in unconventional environments? And can you handle unpredictability?" Elliot nodded eagerly, not wanting to appear hesitant. By the end of the conversation, she told him the position was his if he wanted it. All he had to do was show up at an address outside the city the next morning. The drive to the estate felt surreal. The GPS led him deep into the countryside, where sprawling fields gave way to dense woods. Eventually, he arrived at a massive iron gate flanked by stone pillars adorned with strange symbols that glowed faintly under the morning sun. As the gates creaked open automatically, Elliot drove down a long gravel path until he reached the house, or rather, mansion. It looked more like something out of a sci-fi movie than a home, all sleek curves and shimmering surfaces that reflected the sky. A tall figure stood waiting on the front steps. Elliot stepped out of his car, clutching his toolbox nervously. Up close, the person, if you could even call her that, was breathtaking. Her skin shimmered like opals, shifting colors with every movement. Her limbs were elongated yet graceful, and her eyes sparkled like liquid starlight. This wasn't just any client. This was an alien. "I am Caliph Vinara," she said, her voice low and melodic, but tinged with authority. "You will address me as such." Elliot swallowed hard. Hi. I'm Elliot. Nice to meet you." Caliph studied him coolly, as though sizing him up. "You were recommended for your adaptability. Prove worthy of that recommendation." Over the next hour, she gave him a tour of the estate, pointing out areas he'd be responsible for maintaining. Everything was impossibly advanced. Glowing panels instead of light switches, floating furniture, and devices whose purpose Elliot couldn't even guess. When they reached the kitchen, Caliph handed him a small device. "This is your communicator. Use it only when necessary. You are not to disturb me unless absolutely required." As the day wore on, Elliot began to notice things that unsettled him. Caliph moved with unnatural grace, her presence commanding attention without effort. She spoke little, and when she did, there was an edge to her tone that made him uneasy. Still, he reminded himself of the paycheck and tried to focus on the task at hand. But as night fell and Elliot settled into what would now be his quarters, a cozy room tucked away in a corner of the mansion, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd walked into something far stranger than he'd bargained for. Little did he know, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Elliot's first few days at the estate were a whirlwind of confusion and awe. Every task he was assigned felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Cleaning wasn't just about dusting shelves. It involved wiping down surfaces that seemed alive, pulsating faintly under his touch. Fixing things. Forget screwdrivers. Most repairs required him to interface with glowing panels covered in alien symbols. Caliph rarely spoke to him during these tasks, only giving curt instructions when necessary. But even her silence carried weight, as if she expected perfection without having to ask for it. On the third morning, Elliot woke up earlier than usual, determined to prove himself. He wanted to show Caliph that hiring him hadn't been a mistake. As he wandered through the sprawling mansion, he noticed something odd. Certain doors remained locked no matter what he tried. One particular door at the end of a long hallway caught his attention. It shimmered slightly, unlike any other surface in the house. Curiosity gnawed at him. What could possibly be behind it? Caliph had made her rules clear from day one. Don't enter private chambers, don't touch anything unnecessary, and above all, don't pry. But Elliot couldn't help himself. The more time he spent around Caliph, the more questions swirled in his mind. Who was she, really? Why did she live so far away from others? And why did she seem so guarded? That afternoon, while Caliph was occupied elsewhere in the mansion, Elliot decided to take a closer look at the mysterious door. He hesitated for a moment, glancing over his shoulder to make sure she wasn't watching. When the coast was clear, he reached out and pressed his hand against the shimmering surface. To his surprise, the door slid open silently. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with strange artifacts that looked ancient yet advanced. There were crystalline structures suspended midair, glowing softly, and walls covered in intricate carvings. In the center of the room stood a pedestal holding a small orb that pulsed with light. Elliot stepped closer, drawn to its hypnotic rhythm. That's when he noticed something etched into the pedestal. A series of symbols accompanied by words written in English. Dominion Protocol. Matriarchal Directive. Before he could process what he'd read, the orb flared brightly, and a holographic image flickered to life. It showed scenes of battles, alien figures towering over humans, and cities reduced to rubble. Elliot froze, his heart pounding. Was this some kind of warning, or a record of what Caliph's people were capable of? Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Elliot spun around to see Caliph standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable, but her eyes blazing with fury. "You disobeyed me," she said, her voice icy calm. I didn't mean to." Elliot stammered, backing away instinctively. "You think I wouldn't know?" she interrupted, stepping further into the room. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy. "This is why your kind can never be trusted." For a moment, Elliot thought she might hurt him. Instead, she raised a hand, and the room shifted. The walls began to ripple like water, and the floor tilted unnaturally beneath his feet. Panic surged through him as gravity seemed to pull sideways, forcing him to grab onto the pedestal for support. "This will teach you to follow my rules," Caliph said, her tone colder than before. With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Elliot trapped in an ever-shifting maze of illusions and distorted reality. As the hours passed, Elliot faced bizarre challenges designed to test his resolve. Doors appeared and vanished randomly. Shadows whispered taunts in voices he didn't recognize, and glowing symbols chased him down hallways. Despite the fear gripping him, one thought kept repeating in his mind. Why does she treat human men this way? By the time Caliph finally released him from the ordeal, exhausted and shaken, Elliot realized two things. First, she wasn't just testing him. She was punishing him. Second, there was far more to Caliph than met the eye. Whatever secrets she hid, they weren't going to stay buried forever. The next morning, Elliot woke up sore and disoriented, his mind replaying the events of the previous day. Caliph's punishment had been brutal, not physically, but mentally. The shifting walls, the eerie whispers, the relentless illusions. It was as if she'd turned the mansion into a labyrinth designed to break him. But what unnerved him most wasn't the ordeal itself. It was the look in her eyes when she caught him snooping. There had been anger, yes, but also something else, something deeper, almost like pain. Despite everything, Elliot couldn't bring himself to hate her. If anything, her reaction only fueled his curiosity. Who was Caliph Finar, really? What had driven her to live alone in this strange, isolated estate? And why did she seem so determined to keep humans at arm's length? As the days passed, Caliph resumed her usual routine, acting as though nothing unusual had happened. She gave Elliot his tasks with the same detached efficiency, never mentioning the incident or the forbidden room. But Elliot noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She seemed more watchful now, her sharp gaze lingering on him whenever he moved through the mansion. It was as though she was waiting for him to slip up again. One evening, while working on a malfunctioning panel in the living area, Elliot decided to push his luck. "Why do you treat humans this way?" he asked abruptly, not looking up from his work. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his nerves. Kelith paused mid-step, her back stiffening. For a moment, Elliot thought she might ignore him. Then she turned slowly, her opalescent skin catching the light in a way that made her look almost ethereal. "You presume to question me," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm just trying to understand," Elliot replied, finally meeting her gaze. "You act like we're beneath you, like we're dangerous or something. But I haven't done anything wrong. Not until yesterday, anyway." Kelith studied him silently, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an edge of bitterness. "Your kind has a history of destruction, of taking what doesn't belong to them. I've learned caution." Elliot frowned. "Not all humans are like that. Most of us just want to survive, same as anyone else." "Survival is not the issue," Kelith countered. "It's your inability to respect boundaries. Your insatiable need to meddle where you don't belong." Her eyes flickered toward the hallway leading to the forbidden room, and Elliot felt a pang of guilt. Before he could respond, Kelith raised a hand, and the lights dimmed slightly. "Enough talk," she said. "You'll continue your duties, and remember, rules exist for a reason." But instead of leaving, she lingered, watching him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. After a long pause, she added, "Though perhaps you deserve another lesson." Without warning, the floor beneath Elliot shifted, tilting sharply. He stumbled, grabbing onto the edge of the panel he'd been repairing. The room began to warp around him, colors bleeding into one another like a surreal painting. Kelith stood perfectly still, unaffected by the chaos unfolding around them. "What are you doing?" Elliot demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Testing your resilience," she replied coolly. "Humans pride themselves on adaptability. Let's see how adaptable you truly are." For the next hour, Elliot navigated a series of increasingly bizarre challenges. Gravity flipped unpredictably, forcing him to crawl along ceilings. Illusions of fire and collapsing walls threatened to trap him, only to vanish when he got too close. At one point, he found himself face to face with a holographic version of himself, older, angrier, and accusing him of failure. Through it all, Kelith observed silently, her expression unreadable. Just when Elliot thought he couldn't take any more, the distortion stopped abruptly, and the room returned to normal. He collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. "You endured," Kelith said, her tone softer than before. "Perhaps there is more to you than I assumed." Elliot looked up at her, exhausted but defiant. "Does this mean I can ask questions now?" Kelith hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Ask wisely." For the first time since arriving at the estate, Elliot felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to break through her defenses. Over the next few days, something shifted between Elliot and Kelith. The tension that had once crackled like electricity between them began to soften, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Kelith still maintained her regal demeanor, but there were moments, small, fleeting glimpses, where she seemed less guarded around him. Elliot noticed how she lingered just a little longer during their conversations, or how her tone would soften when explaining the intricacies of her advanced technology. It was as if his persistence and curiosity had chipped away at the walls she'd built around herself. One afternoon, while repairing a malfunctioning device in the main hall, Elliot accidentally triggered a surge of energy. A bright flash erupted from the machine, followed by a low hum that reverberated through the mansion. Alarmed, he turned to see Kelith striding toward him, her expression unreadable. "What did you do?" she asked sharply, though her voice lacked its usual edge. I don't know," Elliot stammered, backing away from the glowing contraption. "It just exploded." To his surprise, Caliph didn't scold him. Instead, she examined the device closely, her fingers moving deftly over its surface. After a moment, she sighed. "You've temporarily disabled my control systems." Elliot's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, turning to face him, "that for the time being, we are equals within this estate. My usual safeguards no longer function." For the first time since arriving, Elliot felt a strange sense of freedom. Without Calith's omnipresent influence over the environment, the mansion felt less intimidating and more like a home. He glanced at her cautiously. "So, what happens now?" Calith tilted her head, considering him. "We wait. The system will restore itself eventually." She paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "In the meantime, you may ask your questions." Elliot hesitated, unsure where to begin. Finally, he settled on the one thing that had been nagging at him since the start. "Why were you banished here? To Earth, I mean." Calith stiffened, her shimmering skin dimming slightly. For a moment, Elliot thought she might refuse to answer. But then she exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing. "My people value order above all else," she began, her voice softer than usual. "Our society is structured, rigid. Females lead, males follow. When I chose to defy those roles, to form a bond with a human male centuries ago, it was seen as an act of rebellion." Elliot listened intently, captivated by her story. "What happened?" "He betrayed me," Calith admitted, her voice tinged with bitterness. "He used our connection to gain access to secrets about my people, secrets meant to remain hidden. His betrayal led to conflict, a war that cost countless lives. My punishment was exile." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Elliot could see the pain behind her carefully composed exterior. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That must have been devastating." Calith looked at him, her liquid starlight eyes searching his face. "You humans are unpredictable. Some of you seek destruction. Others strive for connection. I have yet to decide which category you fall into." Elliot smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm both." To his astonishment, Calith let out a soft laugh, a sound so unexpected and genuine that it caught him off guard. "Perhaps," she said, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. It was the first time he'd seen her truly amused, and it transformed her entire presence. As the hours passed, they found themselves talking more freely than ever before. Calith shared stories of her homeworld, describing vast crystalline cities and skies filled with twin suns. In turn, Elliot told her about Earth, the beauty of its oceans, the chaos of its cities, and the resilience of its people. They laughed together over cultural misunderstandings and marveled at the differences between their worlds. When the mansion's systems finally restored themselves late that evening, neither of them mentioned it. For the first time, the power dynamic between them felt irrelevant. They weren't caretaker and employer anymore. They were two beings navigating the complexities of trust and friendship. As Elliot prepared to retire for the night, Calith stopped him with a quiet word. "Elliot," she said, her tone thoughtful, "thank you for enduring." Elliot nodded, feeling the warmth spread through him despite the chill of the evening air. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. Things would never be the same between them again. The newfound camaraderie between Elliot and Calith didn't last long before curiosity got the better of them both. One evening, while exploring a dusty corner of the mansion's library, filled with ancient scrolls and holographic archives, Elliot stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. Hidden behind a false panel in the wall was a collection of damaged records, their glowing symbols flickering weakly. Among them was an old recording crystal, cracked but still functional. "What is this?" Elliot asked, holding it up for Calith to see. Her eyes widened as she recognized the object. "That belongs in storage," she said sharply, reaching for it. But Elliot pulled back instinctively, his grip tightening. "Not until you explain what it is," he replied, his voice firm despite the unease twisting in his gut. Caliph hesitated, then sighed. "Very well. Play it if you must." Elliot activated the crystal, projecting a grainy hologram into the air. The image showed a younger version of Caliph standing beside a human man, their expressions radiating warmth and affection. They were surrounded by ruins, what appeared to be the remnants of an alien colony. As the scene unfolded, the man spoke passionately about forging peace between humans and Caliph's people. But the tone shifted abruptly when another figure entered the frame. A high-ranking member of Caliph's species, her expression furious. "You betrayed us," the figure spat, pointing accusingly at Caliph. "Your attachment to this primitive has endangered everything." The recording ended abruptly, leaving the room in silence. Elliot stared at Caliph, his mind racing. "Was that your lover?" "Yes," Caliph admitted quietly, her gaze fixed on the empty space where the hologram had been. "His name was Arlen. He promised to help bridge our worlds. Instead, he used me to gain access to classified knowledge. His betrayal sparked a war, a conflict my people are still recovering from." Elliot felt a pang of sympathy for her, but couldn't ignore the nagging questions swirling in his mind. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? About him, about the war?" "Because it is not easy to relive," Caliph snapped, her composure faltering. For the first time, Elliot saw cracks in her otherwise impenetrable facade. Her hands trembled slightly, and her shimmering skin dimmed as though reflecting her inner turmoil. "I have spent centuries trying to forget, to move on. Yet here I am, trapped on this planet, haunted by choices I cannot undo." Elliot stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever happened, you can face it, with me, if you'll let me help." Caliph looked at him, her starlight eyes searching his face. There was vulnerability in her gaze, a rawness he hadn't seen before. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's time." Determined to confront her past together, Elliot suggested they visit the ruins shown in the hologram. "It's in the desert, isn't it?" he asked. "We could go there, face it head-on." Caliph hesitated, then agreed. "If we do this, there will be no turning back. Are you prepared for that?" "I am," Elliot said without hesitation. "Let's finish this." The journey to the desert was grueling, the harsh sunlight beating down on them as they traveled across barren landscapes. When they finally reached the ruins, Caliph froze, her breath catching in her throat. The crumbling structures triggered memories she'd buried deep within herself, memories of love, loss, and betrayal. As they explored the site, Caliph began to open up further, sharing fragments of her life with Arlen. She described their initial connection, how hopeful she'd been about building bridges between their species. But as they delved deeper into the ruins, they discovered remnants of advanced technology scavenged by rival factions seeking to exploit alien artifacts. Scavenger drones descended upon them, forcing Elliot to defend Caliph using makeshift tools and quick thinking. Through it all, Caliph watched him with newfound admiration. "You fight for others," she observed afterward, her voice tinged with wonder. "Even when it costs you." "It's what keeps us going," Elliot replied simply. "Hope." By the end of the day, Caliph stood amidst the ruins, tears glistening in her eyes. "I forgive myself," she whispered, almost too softly for Elliot to hear, "for trusting him, for failing. None of it defines me anymore." Elliot smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Together, they walked back toward their vehicle, ready to leave the ghosts of the past behind. The return journey from the desert was quiet, but the silence between Elliot and Caliph wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken understanding, as though the weight of centuries had finally lifted from Caliph's shoulders. For the first time since Elliot had met her, she seemed at peace, her movements less rigid, her glowing skin radiating a soft warmth instead of its usual cold brilliance. But Elliot knew their challenges weren't over yet. The ruins may have helped Caliph confront her past, But there were still forces outside the estate that wouldn't hesitate to exploit her secrets or harm them both. As they neared the mansion, an ominous hum filled the air. The source became clear moments later. A fleet of drones hovered above the estate, their sleek metallic bodies gleaming under the fading sunlight. They bore insignias unfamiliar to Elliot, but instantly recognizable to Caliph. Her expression hardened as she clenched her fists. Rival factions, she muttered through gritted teeth. They've been tracking us. Elliot's heart sank. What do they want? They seek power, Caliph replied grimly. And knowledge. My exile has made me vulnerable, and they believe I hold information worth extracting, even if it means destroying everything in their path. Before Elliot could respond, the drones descended rapidly, firing beams of energy that scorched the ground around them. Caliph acted swiftly, raising the shimmering barrier with a wave of her hand. The force field crackled as it absorbed the blasts, but Elliot could see the strain on her face. She couldn't maintain it forever. Get inside, she shouted, pushing him toward the mansion. I'll hold them off. No way. Elliot shot back, refusing to budge. We're in this together, remember. Caliph hesitated, torn between protecting him and fighting the attackers. But before she could argue further, one of the drones broke through her shield, sending a shockwave rippling across the yard. Elliot stumbled but quickly regained his footing. Grabbing a fallen piece of debris, that jagged shard of metal, he hurled it at the drone with surprising accuracy. The projectile struck the machine's core, causing it to explode in a burst of sparks. Caliph stared at him, momentarily stunned. You're full of surprises, she said, a flicker of admiration crossing her features. Told you we're in this together, Elliot replied, grinning despite the chaos unfolding around them. Together, they devised a plan. Using Caliph's advanced technology and Elliot's resourcefulness, they lured the remaining drones into a trap. Caliph activated hidden defense systems buried within the estate, while Elliot rigged makeshift explosives using tools from his repair kit. As the drones converged on the mansion, the duo unleashed their counterattack. Explosions lit up the night sky, scattering fragments of metal across the grounds. When the dust settled, only silence remained. Exhausted but victorious, Elliot leaned against the mansion steps, wiping sweat from his brow. Caliph joined him, her posture slumping slightly, a rare sign of fatigue. You risked your life for me, she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. You'd have done the same for me, Elliot replied without hesitation. Caliph nodded slowly, her starlight eyes reflecting gratitude. And something deeper. Perhaps humanity isn't entirely hopeless after all. In that moment, Elliot realized how far they'd come. What started as mistrust and hostility had transformed into mutual respect, and maybe even friendship. Together, they had faced danger, confronted painful truths, and emerged stronger because of it. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Caliph turned to Elliot. This isn't the end, she warned. There will be others who seek to exploit our bond. But I am ready now. With you by my side, I can face whatever comes next. Elliot smiled, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would meet them head-on, together. The days following the attack were a blur of activity. Elliot and Caliph worked tirelessly to repair the damage inflicted on the estate, both physically and emotionally. The mansion bore scars from the battle, charred walls, shattered windows, and scorched patches of earth. But it still stood, much like its inhabitants. Together, they patched up the broken pieces, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of newfound trust and partnership. Caliph seemed different now, lighter somehow. Her once guarded demeanor had softened, replaced by an openness that made her almost approachable. She laughed more often, shared stories freely, and even allowed herself moments of vulnerability. Elliot noticed how she no longer referred to him as just the caretaker. Instead, his name rolled off her tongue with familiarity, as though acknowledging their evolving relationship. One evening, As they sat together on the balcony overlooking the sprawling estate, Caliph turned to Elliot with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed me," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of honesty. "I came here believing humans were incapable of understanding my kind. Yet here you are, proving me wrong at every turn." Elliot chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm just doing what anyone would do if given the chance. You're not so bad yourself, you know." Caliph smiled faintly, her starlight eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "Perhaps. But I must ask you something important." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You have a choice now. You can leave this place, with enough resources to start anew elsewhere, or you can stay. As my equal, not my servant, to help me forge connections between our worlds." Elliot blinked, caught off guard by the offer. He hadn't expected this moment to come so soon, or at all. For weeks, he'd wrestled with conflicting emotions about his future. Part of him longed for normalcy, for a life free of alien intrigue and danger. But another part, a growing part, felt tied to this strange, shimmering woman and the bond they'd built against all odds. "I don't need to think about it," he said finally, meeting her gaze steadily. "I want to stay. Not because of the money or the adventure, but because I believe in what we can do together." Caliph's expression softened, relief washing over her features. "Then it is settled. We begin anew." Over the next few months, Elliot and Caliph transformed the estate into a hub for interstellar diplomacy. They reached out to other alien species, inviting ambassadors to discuss peace and cooperation. Humans, too, began visiting the mansion, curious about the enigmatic alien who lived among them. Slowly but surely, bridges were built where none had existed before. Elliot thrived in his new role, using his knack for problem-solving to mediate cultural misunderstandings and repair damaged technologies brought by visitors. Caliph, meanwhile, embraced her role as a guide, teaching others about her people's history while learning from humanity's resilience and creativity. On one particularly clear night, as stars dotted the sky above them, Caliph joined Elliot on the balcony. She held out a small device, glowing faintly in her palm. "This records memories," she explained. "Moments worth preserving. Would you like to add your own?" Elliot hesitated, then nodded. Placing his hand near hers, he watched as the device pulsed softly, capturing their shared presence. It was symbolic, a reminder of how far they'd come and the potential they held for the future. As they stood side by side, gazing at the heavens, Elliot felt a profound sense of hope. Their journey wasn't without challenges, but it was filled with promise. Together, they had proven that even the most unlikely alliances could spark change. And maybe, just maybe, lead to a brighter tomorrow. For the first time in years, Elliot knew exactly where he belonged. And as Caliph glanced at him with quiet affection, he realized she felt the same. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, one step, one starry night at a time.